The scream cut through the market square before the sun had even finished rising, and Alara dropped the tray of bread she was carrying, the loaves rolling into the mud as she turned toward the sound. A cart had overturned near the well, and a young boy lay pinned beneath one of its wooden wheels, his leg twisted at a painful angle. People rushed forward, shouting instructions that contradicted each other, panic spreading faster than help. Alara pushed through the gathering crowd without thinking, kneeling beside the boy and pressing her hands against the wheel, straining with all her strength to lift it even an inch. It did not move. The wheel was far too heavy for one person, and the men around her seemed frozen, unsure whether pulling the boy free would cause more damage to his leg. Alara's arms shook with effort, her breath coming in short gasps, when a shadow fell over her. She looked up and saw the ragged man from the crossroads, the one the village called a beggar, the one no one dared to look at directly. He said nothing. He simply crouched beside the wheel, placed his hands beneath it, and lifted it, as though it weighed nothing at all. The crowd gasped. 2 other men quickly pulled the boy free, and a woman rushed forward to check his leg, declaring that it was only bruised, not broken. The tension in the square broke into relieved chatter, but Alara barely heard any of it. She was staring at the ragged man, who had already set the wheel down gently, and was backing away from the attention gathering around him, his eyes lowered, his shoulders hunched as though trying to disappear. No one thanked him. No one even seemed to register what he had done, too consumed with relief over the boy to notice the impossible strength of the man who had saved him. Alara noticed. She always noticed him, though she could not explain why. For as long as she could remember, this man had lingered at the edges of the village, sitting near the crossroads, where the dirt road split toward the forest, wrapped in clothes so worn they had lost their original color. Children threw stones at him sometimes, laughing when he flinched but never fought back. Adults looked past him as though he were made of smoke. Alara had never understood the cruelty. She was only 16 the first time she noticed him properly, and she remembered feeling a strange ache in her chest at the sight of him sitting alone in the rain, while everyone else hurried past with their hoods up. That day, she had been carrying a basket of bread from her family's bakery, and without thinking too hard about it, she had walked over and placed a warm loaf in his hands. He had looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes a shade of gray so pale they seemed almost silver in the dim light. He had not smiled, he had not spoken, but something in his gaze had shifted, as though he were seeing her for the first time, truly seeing her, and not simply another villager who would forget he existed the moment she walked away. That had been years ago now. Alara was 21, and the bread she brought him had become a quiet tradition, one she never spoke about to anyone, not even her own family. Every evening, after the bakery closed and the ovens cooled, she would wrap a loaf in cloth and walk to the crossroads. Sometimes he was there, sometimes he was not, and she would leave the bread on the flat stone beside the old oak tree, trusting that he would find it before the crows did. She never asked his name. She was not even certain he had one that anyone remembered. The village had simply started calling him the Wanderer, or, less kindly, the Mad One, though Alara had never once seen him behave with anything resembling madness. If anything, he seemed impossibly calm, watching the world with an unreadable patience, as though he were waiting for something that only he understood. Walking home from the market square that morning, her mind still replaying the impossible strength she had witnessed, Alara found her sister Mara waiting for her at the bakery door, arms crossed, an expression of exasperation on her face. "You dropped an entire tray of bread in the mud," Mara said. "Father is not going to be pleased." "There was an accident," Alara said, brushing past her sister into the warm, flower-scented interior of the shop. "A boy was hurt. I had to help." Mara softened immediately, her irritation melting into concern. "Is he all right?" "He will be." Someone lifted the cart off him. Alara paused, debating whether to mention who that someone had been, then decided against it. Mara would only ask more questions, and Alara did not have answers she was ready to share, not even with herself. The rest of the day passed in the familiar rhythm of the bakery, kneading dough, tending the ovens, wrapping loaves for customers who came and went, with their usual complaints and gossip. Alara listened without truly hearing, her thoughts drifting back to the wheel lifting as though it were empty, to the silver eyes that had met hers so briefly, before the man vanished into the crowd. By evening, when the last customer had left and her father was counting coins behind the counter, Alara wrapped a fresh loaf in cloth, still warm from the oven, and slipped out the back door, before anyone could ask where she was going. The walk to the crossroads took only a few minutes, past the tanner's shop and the small chapel with its crooked steeple, until the village gave way to open fields and the road split in two directions, one leading toward the neighboring towns and the other disappearing into the thick shadow of the forest. The old oak tree stood at the fork, its branches wide and gnarled, and beneath it, exactly where she expected him to be, sat the ragged man. He was staring toward the forest when she approached, his posture unusually alert, his silver eyes narrowed at the tree line, as though listening for something she could not hear. Alara hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt, but he turned his head slightly, before she could decide, acknowledging her presence without quite looking at her. "I saw what you did this morning," she said, holding out the bread, "at the market, with the cart." He did not respond immediately. He took the bread from her hands, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest moment, rough and calloused, but warm. "It needed to be done," he said finally. His voice was low, quiet, rarely used, as though speaking cost him something. "No one else could have lifted it," Alara pressed, unable to stop herself. "It should have taken 3 or 4 men. Perhaps they simply did not try hard enough." His tone was even, giving nothing away, but there was something guarded in the way he said it, a wall she could sense but not see. Alara studied him for a long moment, taking in the details she had noticed 100 times before but never fully considered. He was not old, despite the weathered look of his skin and the roughness of his hands. His shoulders, hidden beneath the layers of tattered cloth, were broad and strong, nothing like the frail beggar the village imagined him to be, and his eyes, whenever she managed to catch them, held an intelligence and awareness that did not match the role he seemed to play. She asked, "At the crossroads, you could go anywhere." Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. "Some things are worth watching over," he said. And then, as though realizing he had said too much, he looked away, back toward the darkening tree line. Alara wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to ask 100 questions that had built up over 5 years of quiet visits and unspoken curiosity, but a distant howl echoed from deep within the forest, long and mournful, and the man's entire body went rigid. His eyes sharpened, his jaw tightened, and for a moment, Alara saw something in his expression that looked almost like recognition, or perhaps warning. "You should go home," he said, his voice suddenly firm in a way she had never heard before. "It is getting late." "What was that sound?" "Wolves," he said simply. "They do not trouble the village, but it is better to be indoors before full dark." Alara glanced toward the forest, a shiver running through her, despite the mild evening air. The village had always spoken of wolves in the forest, though sightings were rare, and attacks rarer still. Some of the older villagers told stories of a pack larger and stranger than any natural wolves should be, led by a creature they called the Alpha King, though most dismissed it as nothing more than superstition, meant to frighten children into staying close to home. "Do you believe those stories?" she asked. "About the Alpha King?" The man's expression closed off entirely, his features settling into the same guarded neutrality she had seen 100 times before. "Stories exist for many reasons," he said. "Go home, Alara. Your family will worry." It was not the first time he had used her name, though she could never remember telling it to him. She had always assumed he must have heard it called out by her father or sister during one of her visits, but something about the way he said it now, quiet and careful, made her wonder if there was more to it than simple observation. She walked home slowly that evening, glancing back once toward the crossroads, where the ragged man remained beneath the oak tree, his silhouette dark against the fading light, his attention fixed once more on the forest, as though standing guard against something only he could sense. That night, sleep did not come easily. Alara lay awake in the small room she shared with Mara, listening to her sister's steady breathing, her own mind restless with unanswered questions. She thought of the strength in his arms as he lifted the wheel, the sharpness in his eyes when the wolf howled, the careful way he spoke as though every word had been chosen to reveal as little as possible. She told herself it did not matter who he truly was, that her kindness toward him required no explanation or reward. She had begun feeding him because it was the right thing to do, because no one deserved to be forgotten and mocked simply for being poor and alone. That reason remained true even now. But somewhere beneath that simple truth, a new question had taken root, one she could not ignore no matter how she tried. Who was the man at the crossroads, really? And why did the forest seem to answer to him in ways she could not yet understand? The following morning brought its own distractions, as a merchant caravan passed through the village on its way to the larger towns beyond the hills, bringing with it news and rumors that spread through the market square like wildfire. Ilara heard fragments of conversation as she helped her father arrange the morning's bread, snippets about unrest in the neighboring territories, about strange sightings near the old ruins beyond the forest, about a growing tension between the human settlements and whatever creatures made their home in the deep woods. "They say the wolves have grown bolder," one merchant told a gathering crowd, his voice pitched for maximum effect. "A shepherd near Willowbrook lost half his flock in a single night, and not a single wolf was seen, only tracks larger than any natural beast should leave. The Alpha King grows restless," an older woman muttered, shaking her head. "Mark my words, something is coming." Ilara listened, with only half her attention, more concerned with keeping the morning's bread properly arranged than with village superstitions, until her father called her over to help a customer, and the conversation faded into the general noise of market day. Yet the words lingered in her mind throughout the morning, resurfacing each time she thought of silver eyes and impossible strength. By midday, her father sent her on an errand to deliver a standing order of bread to the small inn on the far side of the village, the one frequented mostly by travelers passing through rather than locals. Ilara welcomed the walk, glad for an excuse to clear her head, and made her way through the winding streets with the basket balanced against her hip. The inn was quieter than usual when she arrived, most of its usual travelers having already continued their journeys that morning, leaving only a handful of guests scattered among the tables. She delivered the bread to the innkeeper, a stout woman named Delia, who never failed to share whatever gossip had recently crossed her doorstep, and today was no exception. "You heard about the wolves, I assume," Delia said, counting coins into Ilara's palm. "Strange business, all of it. My cousin swears she saw one standing on two legs near the tree line, just for a moment, before it dropped down and ran off like any ordinary wolf." "People see all sorts of things when they are frightened," Ilara said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them, her thoughts drifting once more to the forest and the man who watched over it. "Perhaps," Delia said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "but there is also talk that the Alpha King is searching for something in the human villages. Some say a person, though no one can agree on why a creature like that would care about any of us." Ilara forced a polite smile and excused herself, eager to escape the conversation before it could plant any more unsettling thoughts in her mind. She walked home along the edge of the village, taking the longer path that skirted closer to the forest than usual, unable to resist glancing toward the trees as though she might catch some glimpse of truth hidden among the shadows. She saw nothing unusual, only the familiar tangle of branches and undergrowth, the distant call of birds settling for the evening. Yet as she turned to continue home, she caught sight of a figure standing at the very edge of the tree line, tall and still, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. It was not the ragged man from the crossroads. This figure stood taller, broader, dressed in dark clothing that seemed to absorb the fading light rather than reflect it. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air, a sense of being measured, assessed, weighed against some standard she could not begin to guess. Then the figure turned and disappeared into the trees, moving with a fluid grace that seemed entirely unnatural, and Ilara was left standing alone at the edge of the field, her heart pounding, questions multiplying faster than she could process them. She did not visit the crossroads that evening. Instead, she hurried home, bolted the door behind her, and told no one what she had seen, though the memory of those watching eyes followed her into her dreams, tangled together with silver eyes and impossible strength, until she could no longer be certain where the ragged man ended and the mystery of the forest began. The knock at the door came just before midnight, 3 sharp raps that jolted Ilara awake, her heart already racing before her mind caught up to the sound. Mara stirred beside her, mumbling something incoherent, but Ilara was already sliding out of bed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders, as she moved toward the small window overlooking the street. Another knock followed, more urgent this time, and she heard her father's footsteps on the stairs, heavy and hurried. Ilara reached the top of the staircase just as he opened the door, and cold night air rushed into the house, carrying with it the smell of smoke. "Edmund," a voice said, breathless and frightened. It was Colton, a young farmer from the eastern edge of the village, his face pale in the lantern light. "The Hensley barn is burning. We need every hand we can get, or the fire will spread to the fields." Her father was already reaching for his coat. "Ilara, wake your sister. Fetch water from the well, as much as the two of you can carry." The next hour passed in a blur of frantic motion. Buckets passed hand to hand along a chain of villagers, stretching from the well to the burning barn, the heat of the flames pressing against Ilara's skin, even from a distance. The fire had already consumed half the structure by the time enough people gathered to fight it properly, and despite their efforts, it became clear that the barn itself could not be saved. The focus shifted instead to protecting the surrounding fields, and the Hensley family's modest home nearby. Ilara worked alongside Mara, her arms aching from the weight of the buckets, her lungs burning from smoke that drifted across the yard in shifting clouds. It was during a brief pause, as she caught her breath and searched for the next bucket to fill, that she noticed him. The ragged man stood near the edge of the chaos, his attention fixed not on the fire, but on the tree line beyond the Hensley property, his posture tense in a way that seemed disconnected from the immediate crisis. Ilara followed his gaze and saw nothing at first. Only darkness and the flickering orange light of the flames reflected against distant trees. Then she saw movement, subtle and quick, shapes shifting between the shadows that might have been wolves or might have been something else entirely. "You there," Colton called out, spotting the ragged man and misreading his stillness as idleness. "We need every hand. Grab a bucket." The man did not move immediately, his attention still fixed on the tree line, and Colton's frustration sharpened into anger. "Do you hear me? Or does charity mean nothing to you, unless it flows in your direction?" Several nearby villagers laughed, the tension of the night finding release in cruelty, and Ilara felt a flash of anger on the ragged man's behalf. But before she could speak, he turned, his expression unreadable, and moved toward the water chain without a word, taking up a position beside her and lifting buckets with an ease that made the exhausting work look effortless. They worked in silence for a long while, the fire gradually losing its battle against the combined effort of the village, until only smoldering embers remained where the barn had once stood. As the crowd began to disperse, exhaustion replacing panic, Ilara found herself walking alongside the ragged man toward the edge of the property, neither of them quite ready to return home. "What were you looking at?" she asked quietly, once they were far enough from the others to speak without being overheard.
"Before Colton called out to you, you were watching the trees."
He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he might refuse to answer as he so often did. But something in the night, in the shared exhaustion of fighting the fire together, seemed to loosen the careful guard he usually kept around his words. "There are things in that forest that do not always announce themselves," he said. "It is wise to watch for them, especially on nights when fire and chaos might draw them closer." "Wolves," Ilara said, remembering the fragments of gossip from the merchant caravan, and Delia's whispered stories. "Everyone speaks of them lately. Some say there is a king among them." His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, subtle and controlled. "Stories grow larger with each retelling. I would not put too much faith in them." "But you do not deny it," she pressed, surprising herself with her own boldness. "I neither confirm nor deny what I do not know for certain," he said, though the careful precision of his answer told her more than the words themselves. They reached the crossroads as the conversation trailed into silence, the old oak tree standing dark against the star-filled sky. Ilara realized she had walked farther than intended, her exhaustion from the night's efforts catching up with her all at once, her legs suddenly heavy. "You should rest," the man said, noticing her fatigue. "The walk home is not far, but the night has been long." "Will you be all right?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider it. It was not a question she had ever asked him before, not directly, though she had wondered it silently 100 times over the years. Something shifted in his expression, softening in a way she had rarely seen, though it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I have survived far worse than a barn fire," he said. "Go home, Ilara. Rest. The village will need steady hands tomorrow to help the Hensleys rebuild." She nodded, too tired to argue, and made her way home through the quiet streets, the smell of smoke still clinging to her clothes and hair. Sleep found her quickly despite the strange events of the night, though her dreams were filled with fire and shadow. with silver eyes watching from darkness that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The days that followed brought the village together in the shared work of helping the Hensley family recover from their loss. Alara's father contributed loaves of bread to feed the workers rebuilding the barn, and Alara found herself spending long hours carrying supplies and preparing meals for the laborers, the physical exhaustion a welcome distraction from the questions still circling her mind. It was nearly a week later, during a rare quiet afternoon at the bakery, that Nolan arrived in the village, a traveling merchant known for dealing in rare goods and even rarer information. He was not a frequent visitor, appearing perhaps twice a year with his cart of curiosities, but his arrivals always drew a crowd eager for news of the wider world. Alara noticed him first through the bakery window, his cart rattling into the market square, and she felt an odd pull of curiosity she could not quite explain, as though something important awaited his arrival. She finished the batch of bread she was tending, before stepping outside, drawn by the growing crowd gathering around his cart. Nolan was already deep into a story by the time she arrived, his voice carrying easily over the murmur of the crowd, embellished with the practiced flourishes of a man who understood the value of a good tale. "I passed through Willowbrook not 3 days ago," he was saying, "and the whole town speaks of nothing else. A merchant caravan was attacked on the eastern road, set upon by bandits who thought themselves clever enough to take advantage of the chaos near the forest. But something intervened, something the survivors describe as more wolf than man, and more man than wolf, tearing through the bandits with a fury that left the survivors trembling for days afterward. The Alpha King," someone in the crowd murmured, and the words rippled outward, repeated in hushed tones of fear and fascination. "Perhaps," Nolan said, clearly enjoying the effect of his story. "Though I have heard other things as well, stranger still. They say the Alpha King does not simply defend his territory from bandits and thieves. They say he searches for something among the human villages, something he has sought for years without success." "What could a creature like that possibly want from us?" a villager called out, skepticism plain in his voice. Nolan's expression shifted, taking on a more serious cast. "A queen, some say. A mate strong enough and worthy enough to stand beside him, though how such a person might be recognized, no one can say for certain. Others claim it is something else entirely, a debt owed, a promise made generations ago between the human villages and the forest creatures, though the details have been lost to time." Alara listened with growing unease, her thoughts drifting unbidden to the ragged man at the crossroads, to his impossible strength, his watchful eyes, the way the forest seemed to command his attention even during moments of crisis. She told herself the connection was foolish, born of nothing more than an overactive imagination, fed by too many strange coincidences. Yet as she turned to walk back toward the bakery, she caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the square, half hidden in the shadow of a building, listening to Nolan's story, with an intensity that betrayed far more interest than a simple beggar should have shown. The ragged man's eyes met hers across the distance, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. Then he turned and disappeared into the narrow alley beside the tanner's shop, leaving Alara standing alone in the market square, Nolan's words still echoing in her mind, and a new and unsettling certainty beginning to take root in her heart. The bell of the village chapel rang out in a frantic, uneven rhythm, nothing like the steady calls that marked Sunday mornings or festival days, and Alara dropped the basket of eggs she had been carrying, the shells cracking against the cobblestones as she turned toward the sound. People were already running toward the square, faces pale with alarm, and she caught fragments of shouted words as she joined the rushing crowd. "Bandits, on the northern road, coming this way." Her father emerged from the bakery, flour still dusting his apron, his expression grim as he pulled her aside. "Alara, take your sister and get inside. Bar the door and stay away from the windows." "What is happening?" she asked, though the fear in his eyes told her enough. "A group of bandits raided the Milford settlement 2 days ago," he said quickly. "Word came this morning that they are moving toward us, likely seeking supplies before winter. The men are gathering what defenses we can manage, but there has been no time to prepare properly." Alara found Mara already waiting near the bakery entrance, their younger brother Peter clutched close to her side, his eyes wide with a child's uncomprehending fear. The three of them retreated inside, bolting the door as their father had instructed, though the thin wooden barrier did little to ease Alara's racing heart. Through the narrow gap in the shuttered window, She watched the village transform within minutes, men gathering whatever weapons they possessed, farm tools and old hunting knives standing in for proper defenses against whatever threat approached. The elder Osric stood at the center of the square, directing the chaos with as much authority as he could muster, though his voice carried an edge of desperation that did little to inspire confidence. The bandits arrived just as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. A group of perhaps 15 men, mounted on rough horses, their weapons already drawn as they thundered into the market square. Ilara pressed closer to the gap in the shutters, her breath catching as she watched the confrontation unfold, the village's meager defenses looking hopelessly inadequate against the organized force of the attackers. The bandit leader, a broad man named Garrick, with a scarred face and cold eyes, rode directly toward Osric, his sword gleaming in the fading light. "Your grain stores, your coin, and anything else of value," he demanded, his voice carrying easily across the square. "Give it willingly, and perhaps we leave your homes standing." Osric tried to reason with him, offering a portion of the village's stores in exchange for peace, but Garrick's men had already begun spreading through the square, kicking open doors, dragging out whatever supplies they could find. Ilara watched in alarm as one of the bandits approached the bakery, testing the bolted door with a rough shoulder, and she pulled Mara and Peter back from the window, her mind racing for some way to protect them. The door held for only a few moments before splintering under repeated blows, and Ilara positioned herself between the entrance and her siblings, though she had no weapon, no plan, nothing but desperate resolve. The bandit who forced his way inside was a large man, his expression cold with the confidence of someone who had never faced meaningful resistance, and he stepped closer as he spotted the three of them huddled in the corner. "Well now," he said, "something a bit more valuable than bread, perhaps." Ilara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, but she forced herself to stand firm, placing herself fully between the bandit and her siblings. "There is nothing here for you," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Take what supplies you find, and leave us in peace." The bandit took another step forward, his hand reaching for her arm, and Ilara braced herself, uncertain what she could possibly do against a man so much larger and stronger than herself, when a shadow filled the doorway behind him, moving with a speed that seemed to blur the edges of her vision. The bandit was lifted off his feet and thrown backward through the shattered door, before Ilara fully understood what had happened, his body landing hard in the market square. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the chaos outside, was the ragged man from the crossroads, though something about him had changed entirely. His posture had lost every trace of the hunched, defeated bearing he usually carried. He stood tall now, his shoulders squared, his silver eyes blazing with an intensity that seemed to illuminate the darkening room. The tattered clothes remained the same, but everything else about him radiated a power that made Ilara's breath catch in her throat. "Stay inside," he said, his voice carrying an authority she had never heard from him before. "Whatever happens outside, stay inside." He turned and moved back into the square before she could respond, and Ilara rushed to the broken doorway despite his instructions, unable to resist watching what unfolded. The bandit he had thrown was already scrambling to his feet, calling out to his companions, and within moments, several more bandits converged on the ragged man, weapons raised. What happened next defied every explanation Ilara might have offered. The ragged man moved with impossible speed, deflecting blows that should have struck true, disarming opponents with a precision that spoke of extensive training rather than desperate improvisation. He fought without a weapon, using only his bare hands, and a fluid, almost animal grace that left the bandits scattered and disarmed within minutes. Garrick, watching the collapse of his men with growing fury, finally turned his horse toward the ragged man, sword raised. But before the blade could fall, a massive shape emerged from the shadows at the edge of the square. A wolf, larger than any natural creature should be, its fur dark as midnight, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intelligence. The wolf moved between Garrick and the ragged man, and the bandit leader's horse reared in terror, throwing its rider to the ground. Garrick scrambled backward, his earlier confidence replaced entirely by naked fear, and he shouted a retreat to his remaining men, abandoning whatever supplies they had already gathered in their haste to escape the square. The wolf watched them go, its massive head tracking their retreat until the last of the bandits had disappeared down the northern road, and then it turned toward the ragged man, who had remained standing amid the wreckage of the brief battle. For a moment, Ilara thought she saw something pass between them, an understanding too subtle for words, before the wolf melted back into the shadows of the forest beyond the village. The square fell into stunned silence, villagers emerging cautiously from their homes to survey the aftermath, murmurs of disbelief rippling through the gathering crowd as they took in the scattered, groaning bandits and the destruction the ragged man had single-handedly wrought. Ilara stepped fully out of the bakery, Mara and Peter close behind her, her eyes fixed on the man who had just saved not only her family, but the entire village. He was breathing hard, though whether from exertion or something else, she could not tell, and his eyes found hers across the square with an intensity that made her chest tighten. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the noise of the recovering village fading into the background as something passed between them, unspoken but undeniable. "You," Osric said, approaching cautiously, his voice trembling with a mixture of gratitude and unease. "How did you do this? What are you?" The ragged man's expression closed off immediately, the intensity fading back into the careful neutrality Ilara had grown accustomed to over the years. "It does not matter what I am," he said. "What matters is that your village is safe, for now." "For now?" Osric repeated, alarm creeping into his voice. "Do you believe they will return?" "Men like that rarely accept defeat easily," the ragged man said. "But your village will need to organize better defenses regardless of what I can offer. I cannot always be here to intervene." He turned then, moving through the crowd that parted instinctively around him, their earlier disdain replaced by a wary respect they did not fully understand. Ilara watched him go, torn between the urge to follow and the practical need to help her family recover from the chaos of the attack. Mara gripped her arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ilara, who is that man? What did we just see?" "I do not know," Ilara admitted, though the words felt increasingly hollow, given everything she had witnessed over the past weeks. The strength, the watchfulness, the wolf that had appeared at exactly the right moment, moving with an understanding that suggested far more than coincidence. That evening, once the village had settled into an uneasy calm, and the wounded bandits had been secured for judgment by the neighboring authorities, Ilara slipped away from her family's worried attention and made her way toward the crossroads, her mind full of questions she could no longer ignore. She found him beneath the oak tree, though he seemed different now, more guarded than she had seen him in years, as though the events of the day had forced him to retreat further behind whatever walls he had built around himself. "Thank you," she said simply, settling onto the ground near him, though not too close. "For my family, for the entire village." He nodded once, acknowledging her words without quite meeting her eyes. "I could not stand by and watch harm come to those who have shown kindness, even when the world gave them little reason to." "That fighting," Ilara said carefully. "No ordinary man moves like that, and the wolf, it seemed to understand you, to work alongside you as though you had commanded it." "There are many things in this world that defy simple explanation," he said, his tone deliberately vague, though something in his posture suggested exhaustion rather than evasion. "I am not asking for simple explanations," Ilara pressed gently. "I am asking for the truth, whatever that truth might be. You have protected my family twice now. I think I deserve to understand why." For a long moment, he said nothing, his silver eyes fixed on the darkening tree line, and Ilara wondered if she had finally pushed too far, if this question might undo the fragile trust they had built over years of quiet kindness. But then he spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it, carrying a weight that suggested the words cost him something significant. "The truth is complicated, Ilara, and once I share it, I cannot take it back. There are reasons I have kept myself hidden, reasons that extend beyond simple humility or misfortune. I am not who this village believes me to be." "Then tell me who you are," she said, her heart pounding with an anticipation she could not fully explain. He turned to look at her then, his silver eyes catching the last light of the setting sun, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something like fear flicker across his features, though whether it was fear of her reaction or fear of the truth itself, she could not say. "Not tonight," he said finally, rising to his feet with a suddenness that ended the conversation before it could truly begin. "The village needs you tonight, Ilara. Your family will be worried. Go home, and I promise you, when the time is right, you will have your answers." She wanted to argue, wanted to demand the truth immediately, rather than accept another delay, but something in his expression convinced her, that pushing further would accomplish nothing except driving him away entirely. She rose reluctantly, brushing the dirt from her skirt, and offered him one final look before turning back toward the village. "I will hold you to that promise," she said. He did not respond, but as she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her, and she carried with her the growing certainty that whatever truth he was hiding would change everything she thought she understood about the quiet, ragged man she had fed, without question, for so many years. A wolf stood in the middle of the road, blocking Alara's path home, its yellow eyes fixed on her with an intensity that froze the breath in her chest. She had taken the shortcut past the mill pond without thinking, eager to reach home before the last light faded, and now she found herself alone on a narrow path, with a creature far larger than any wolf had a right to be, its dark fur bristling as it studied her without moving. She did not run. Something instinctive told her that running would only invite the very danger she feared, and so she stood frozen, her basket of herbs forgotten in her trembling hands, her eyes locked with the wolf's unblinking gaze. Long seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, the forest silent around them, except for the distant call of an owl somewhere in the darkening trees. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the wolf turned and melted back into the underbrush, leaving Alara alone on the path, her heart hammering against her ribs. She waited several more minutes before daring to move, half convinced the creature might return, before finally continuing home at a pace just short of running. She said nothing to her family about the encounter that night, though sleep proved elusive as she replayed the moment over and over, searching for some explanation that made sense. The wolf had not attacked, it had simply watched her, as though assessing her, and something about the intelligence in its eyes reminded her uncomfortably of the dark shape that had intervened during the bandit attack weeks earlier. 5 years had passed since that first loaf of bread at the crossroads, and Alara had grown from an uncertain girl of 16 into a woman who understood her own mind, though the mystery of the ragged man remained as unresolved as ever. He had never followed through on his promise to explain himself, always finding some reason to delay, some crisis or distraction that pushed the conversation aside. Yet despite the unanswered questions, their bond had only deepened with each passing season, built on countless quiet evenings at the crossroads, shared silences that felt more meaningful than most conversations she had with anyone else. The following morning brought a different kind of trouble, one that had nothing to do with wolves or forests. Alara's father fell ill quite suddenly, collapsing behind the bakery counter with a fever so severe that Mara had to run for the village healer, while Alara struggled to carry him to his bed. The healer, an elderly woman named Bettina, examined him with a grave expression that did little to ease the family's mounting fear. "It is the wasting fever," Bettina said finally, packing away her instruments with slow, deliberate movements. "I have seen it before, though rarely this severe. I can offer herbs to ease his suffering, but I cannot promise they will be enough. He needs rest, warmth, and time, and even then, recovery is not certain." The days that followed blurred together in a haze of worry and exhaustion, Alara and Mara taking turns tending to their father while managing the bakery's daily demands. Their younger brother Peter, too young to offer much practical help beyond fetching water and keeping quiet. The family's modest savings dwindled quickly as they purchased what herbs and remedies Bettina recommended, and Alara found herself lying awake each night, calculating how much longer they could sustain both the bakery and their father's care. It was during the second week of his illness, when hope had begun to feel increasingly fragile, that Alara found a small clay jar sitting outside the bakery door one morning, its contents unfamiliar but clearly medicinal, accompanied by no note or explanation of any kind. She brought it to Bettina, who examined the contents with growing surprise. "This is remarkable," Bettina said, sniffing the contents carefully. "A rare combination of herbs, some of which do not grow anywhere near this region. Whoever prepared this understood the wasting fever far better than I do. Where did you find it?" "Outside our door," Alara said, though even as she spoke, a suspicion was forming in her mind, one she could not quite bring herself to voice aloud. "I do not know who left it." Under Bettina's careful administration, the strange remedy proved remarkably effective, her father's fever breaking within days, his strength slowly returning in a way that seemed almost miraculous, given how severe his condition had been. The family's relief was immense, though Alara found herself unable to shake the growing certainty that the gift had not arrived by chance. That evening, Once her father was resting comfortably, and Mara had taken over watching him, Ilara made her way to the crossroads, for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Her basket filled with bread she had not been able to deliver during the crisis. She found the ragged man in his usual place beneath the oak tree, and something in his expression, a flicker of concern quickly masked, told her more than words might have. "You heard about my father," she said, settling beside him. "Illness spreads through village gossip as quickly as it spreads through bodies," he said carefully, though his tone gave little away. "The medicine that appeared outside our door," Ilara continued, watching his face closely. "Bettina said it contained herbs that do not grow in this region. Rare herbs, difficult to find, and even more difficult to prepare correctly." He was quiet for a long moment, and Ilara pressed on, her voice softening. "It saved his life. Whoever left it saved my father's life, and I think you know exactly who that was." "Does it matter who provided it?" he said finally, "so long as it worked." "It matters to me," Ilara said. "You have watched over my family in ways I am only beginning to understand. The medicine, the wolf that appeared during the bandit attack, the strength that should not exist in any ordinary man. I have fed you for 5 years without ever understanding why you deserve such devotion in return." His silver eyes met hers then, and something in his expression softened, the careful walls he maintained cracking just slightly to reveal the weight of years he carried behind them. "You misunderstand," he said quietly. "It is not devotion that I owe you. It is the opposite. You have given without expectation, without knowing what you were truly offering, and that kindness has meant more to me than you could possibly understand." "Then help me understand," Ilara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." He hesitated, glancing toward the darkening forest, as though drawing courage from its familiar shadows, and for a moment, Ilara thought he might finally share whatever truth he had kept hidden for so long. But then his expression shifted, alarm replacing vulnerability, his entire body going rigid as a distant sound reached them, faint but unmistakable. The sound of horses approaching from the northern road. "Not the same bandits," he murmured, rising quickly to his feet, his posture shifting into the alert readiness she had witnessed during the earlier attack. "Something else, something worse." "What do you mean?" Ilara asked, fear creeping into her voice as she stood as well. "Go home," he said urgently. "Now, Ilara. Whatever is coming, I need to know you and your family are safe before I can face it." "Tell me what is happening," she insisted, refusing to move, despite the growing tension in his expression. He turned to her then, his silver eyes intense with an urgency that left no room for argument. "There are those among my own kind who do not welcome the choices I have made, who believe my time spent among humans has weakened me, made me unworthy of the position I hold. If they have found me here, your presence puts you in danger far greater than any bandit attack. Please, for your own safety, go home." The words struck Ilara with the force of confirmation, the careful phrase, "my own kind," settling into place alongside every strange event of the past weeks, every fragment of gossip and legend she had dismissed as mere superstition. Yet before she could fully process the implications, he had already moved past her, striding toward the forest with a purpose that made further argument impossible. Ilara ran home, her heart pounding with fear that had nothing to do with bandits and everything to do with the sudden, overwhelming realization that the man she had fed for 5 years was something far beyond ordinary, something connected to legends she had never fully believed, standing now at the edge of a conflict she did not understand, but somehow already feared for his sake more than her own. She did not sleep that night, listening instead to the distant sounds carried on the wind, faint howls and what might have been the clash of something like battle, far enough away that she could not be certain of anything beyond her own racing imagination. When morning came, she found herself at the window before the sun had fully risen, searching the tree line for any sign of the man who had, in a single conversation, transformed from a mysterious beggar into something she could no longer pretend to understand, through simple, comfortable ignorance. Blood stained the grass near the crossroads when Ilara finally worked up the courage to venture beyond the village at midday, her stomach twisting at the sight of torn earth and broken branches scattered across the clearing where the old oak tree stood. The ragged man was nowhere to be found, and panic rose in her throat as she searched the area, calling his name into the silent forest. though she had never before spoken it aloud in such desperation. There was no answer. She circled the clearing twice, examining the signs of what had clearly been a violent struggle. Deep gouges in the tree bark, patches of disturbed earth, and more of that troubling dark red staining the grass in several places. Whatever had happened here during the night had been severe, and the absence of any body, human or wolf, offered only cold comfort rather than reassurance. She returned to the village with her mind racing through possibilities, each more frightening than the last, and spent the following days in a state of constant, quiet anxiety, finding excuses to visit the crossroads at every opportunity, despite finding it empty each time. Her family noticed her distraction, though she offered no real explanation, beyond vague concerns about a friend who had gone missing, an explanation that satisfied no one, but that she could not bring herself to expand upon. It was nearly a week later, during an unusually warm afternoon when Alara had ventured slightly deeper into the forest than she typically dared, gathering mushrooms for the bakery's evening stew, that she heard a low groan coming from behind a fallen log just off the narrow path she followed. Her heart leaped with a mixture of hope and dread as she approached cautiously, and there, hidden in the shadow of the fallen tree, she found him. He was alive, though barely, his body marked with wounds that should have killed a lesser man, deep gashes across his shoulder and side that had clearly been left untreated for days. His breathing came in shallow, ragged gasps, and his skin held a pallor that frightened her more than any of his injuries alone. Alara dropped her basket and knelt beside him immediately, her training in basic wound care from years of helping her father, limited, but not entirely useless. "You need help," she said, examining the extent of his injuries with growing alarm. "Real help, more than I can offer here in the forest. No healers," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one can know. It would endanger everyone." "You will die if these wounds go untreated much longer," Alara said firmly, tearing a strip of cloth from her own skirt to press against the worst of the bleeding. "I do not care about secrets right now. I care about keeping you alive." He grasped her wrist with surprising strength, despite his weakened state, his silver eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stopped her protest before it could fully form. "There is a cave," he said slowly, each word costing him visible effort. "Beyond the ridge, past the stream. If you can help me reach it, I will heal there, on my own. It simply takes time. More time than I have spent trying to reach it alone." Alara hesitated only a moment before nodding, understanding that whatever secrets he protected mattered enough to risk his own life, rather than reveal them carelessly. She helped him to his feet, his weight leaning heavily against her smaller frame, and together they made slow, painful progress through the forest, following directions he offered in fragments between labored breaths. The cave, when they finally reached it after what felt like hours, though the sun had barely moved, proved larger than Alara expected, its entrance hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines that would have concealed it from any casual observer. Inside, the air was cool and dry, and evidence of previous habitation suggested this was not the first time he had sought refuge here. She helped him settle onto a bed of gathered furs near the back of the cave, and only then, in the dim light filtering through the entrance, did she truly see the extent of his injuries. Claw marks, unmistakably from something with far larger paws than any natural wolf, crossed his shoulder and ribs, the wounds deep enough that Alara felt her stomach turn at the sight of them. "What did this to you?" she asked, working quickly to clean the wounds with water from her water skin, grateful for whatever instinct had prompted her to carry it that morning. "Rivals," he said simply, wincing, as she pressed a cleaned cloth against the deepest gash. "Those who believe my absence from my true responsibilities has left an opening for challenge. They came seeking to prove their strength against mine, to claim what they believe I have abandoned. Your true responsibilities," Alara repeated slowly, her hands pausing in their work as the weight of the phrase settled over her. "You are speaking of the legends, the Alpha King." He said nothing, but his silence told her everything his words had refused to confirm for years, and Alara found herself oddly calm in the face of confirmation she had half suspected for weeks, perhaps longer if she was honest with herself about all the strange occurrences she had witnessed and dismissed. "Why?" she asked finally, resuming her careful work on his wounds. "Would the Alpha King choose to live as a beggar at the edge of a human village, accepting scraps of charity from a baker's daughter, when he could command far greater comfort among his own kind?" He was quiet for a long moment, his breathing gradually steadying as her ministrations eased the worst of his pain. "There is a tradition among my kind," he said finally, "one that most have forgotten or chosen to ignore. A true leader must understand what it means to have nothing, to depend entirely on the kindness of others, without any claim of authority or power to compel it. I chose to walk among humans, stripped of every advantage my position might offer, to learn whether true nobility could be found in a world that judged me only by my apparent poverty." "And what did you learn?" Alara asked softly. His eyes met hers, and something in his expression shifted, becoming vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed before, not even during the crisis of the bandit attack, or the fever that had nearly claimed her father. "I learned that most people see only what is convenient to see," he said. "They looked at rags and saw nothing worth their attention, worth their compassion. But you, Alara, you looked at the same rags and saw a person deserving of kindness, regardless of what that kindness might cost you." "It never felt like a cost," she said honestly. "It felt like the only decent thing to do. That is precisely why it mattered so much," he said. "Not because you knew who I was, but because you did not know. And still you chose compassion over cruelty, year after year, without ever asking what you might receive in return." Alara sat back slightly, processing the weight of his words alongside the reality she was only now beginning to fully comprehend. The man before her, wounded and vulnerable in a hidden cave, was not simply the mysterious beggar she had cared for out of instinctive kindness. He was a king among creatures whose existence the village had reduced to frightened superstition, and somehow, across 5 years of quiet evenings and shared silences, she had become entangled in a truth far larger than anything she had imagined. "What happens now?" she asked. "Those who attacked you, will they return?" "Likely," he admitted. "My challengers will not accept a single defeat as final proof of my strength, particularly given how weakened I currently remain. I will need time to heal fully before I can face them again with any confidence." "Then let me help you," Alara said firmly. "I have cared for you all these years without understanding why. I am not prepared to abandon you now that I finally do." He studied her for a long moment, something like wonder mixing with the exhaustion still evident in his features, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a warmth she had never heard from him before, unguarded and genuine, in a way that made her chest tighten with emotions she was only beginning to understand herself. "5 years ago, you offered me bread without asking my name," he said quietly. "Now you offer me your protection, without asking for my crown. I am beginning to understand, Alara, why fate led me to that crossroads on the very day you first noticed me among the shadows." She did not fully understand what he meant by those words, not yet, but something in his tone suggested a deeper truth still waiting to be revealed, one that would require far more courage from both of them before this story could reach whatever ending awaited it. For now, she simply continued her work, tending his wounds with the same quiet devotion she had shown for 5 years, though everything about their relationship had irrevocably changed the moment truth replaced mystery between them. Footsteps echoed through the cave entrance just before dawn, quiet but deliberate, and Alara jolted awake from the shallow sleep she had allowed herself while keeping watch over the wounded king through the night. She had told her family she was staying with a friend in a neighboring cottage, a lie that sat uncomfortably with her honest nature, but one she had judged necessary given the circumstances. Now, as the footsteps drew closer, she reached instinctively for a sharpened stick she had gathered the previous evening, though she knew it would offer little real protection against whatever approached. "Peace," a voice called softly from beyond the vine curtain, and a moment later, a tall man stepped into the dim light of the cave, his features sharp and watchful, his clothing simple, but well made, nothing like the rags Alara had grown accustomed to seeing on the wounded king beside her. "I mean no harm. I have come only to check on my king." The wounded man beside her stirred, recognition flickering across his pale features despite his weakened state. "Fenwick," he murmured, "you should not have risked coming here." "Someone had to," the newcomer Fenwick said, moving further into the cave with the easy grace Alara now recognized as characteristic of whatever creatures shared this hidden world alongside humanity. "The others believe you have fled entirely, too weakened by your challengers, to defend your position. If they discover you here, in this state, they will not hesitate to finish what they started." "How much time do I have?" the king asked, struggling to sit up, despite the pain evident in his expression. "Days, perhaps, if you rest properly," Fenwick said. his gaze shifting toward Alara with obvious curiosity. "And who is this, that you have trusted with a secret you have guarded so carefully for years?" "Alara," the king said simply. "She has cared for me since I first began my time among the humans. She found me here, wounded, and refused to abandon me, despite everything she now understands." Fenwick studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally offering a slight, respectful nod. "Then perhaps the years spent among humans were not entirely wasted after all," he said. "Few among our own kind would have shown such loyalty to someone they believed a simple beggar." "I did not know what he was," Alara said quietly. "I simply saw someone who needed kindness, and I offered what I could." "And that," Fenwick said, "is precisely why the old traditions valued such tests of character. Power reveals itself easily when surrounded by those who already recognize it. True character reveals itself only when there is nothing to be gained from kindness beyond the simple satisfaction of doing what is right." The king shifted against the furs, wincing slightly, and Fenwick's expression grew more serious as he examined the wounds Alara had tended through the night. "These will heal, given time, but you cannot remain hidden here indefinitely. Colwyn grows bolder each day you remain absent, spreading doubt among the pack about your fitness to lead." "Colwyn," the king repeated, a note of weary frustration entering his voice. "He has wanted my position since before I ever chose to walk among humans. This latest challenge is merely his most direct attempt yet. He claims your time spent as a beggar has made you weak, unworthy of leading a pack that values strength above all else," Fenwick said. "Many among the younger wolves believe him, having never known you as anything other than the absent king, who abandoned his throne for reasons they do not understand." Alara listened to this exchange with growing understanding of the complicated world the king inhabited, beyond the simple crossroads where she had known him for so many years. The forest held an entire society, one with its own politics and rivalries, its own expectations and traditions, that she was only beginning to glimpse through fragments of conversation. "What must be done to prove his claims false?" she asked, surprising herself with her own boldness in addressing a stranger from this hidden world. Fenwick's eyebrows rose slightly at her question, though he answered without hesitation. "Tradition demands a formal challenge, fought according to ancient rules that have governed our kind for generations. Whoever demonstrates greater strength and cunning claims leadership, though such challenges have rarely proven necessary in recent years, given how thoroughly our king has maintained his position through respect rather than mere fear." "And if he loses?" Alara asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "Then Colwyn becomes Alpha King," Fenwick said simply, "and our king's time among humans becomes nothing more than a cautionary tale told to future generations about the dangers of forgetting one's true nature." The king closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion and frustration mixing across his features. "I need time to heal before I can face Colwyn properly," he said, "time that Fenwick's warning suggests I may not have." "Then rest now, while you can," Fenwick said, rising to leave. "I will do what I can to buy you additional time, though I cannot promise how much that will amount to. The pack grows restless, and restlessness breeds impatience for resolution, one way or another." After Fenwick departed, disappearing back into the forest, with the same silent grace with which he had arrived, Alara sat quietly beside the king, processing everything she had just witnessed and learned. The simple story she had constructed in her mind, of a mysterious beggar revealed to be some manner of nobility, had expanded into something far more complex, a political struggle with real consequences that extended far beyond her own understanding of the world. "You could lose everything," she said finally, breaking the silence that had settled over the cave. "Your position, your authority, simply because you chose to spend years living among humans." "Perhaps," the king said, his voice tired but steady. "But I do not regret the choice, Alara, regardless of what consequences it might bring. I learned things during my years at that crossroads that no amount of authority or power could have taught me otherwise." "What things?" she asked, genuinely curious despite the gravity of their situation. "That kindness given freely, without expectation of reward, reveals more about a person's true character than any test of strength or cunning ever could," he said. "I watched you, Alara, watched you offer bread to a man the entire village dismissed as beneath their notice, watched you continue that kindness, for 5 years, without ever demanding explanation or gratitude in return. If I must lose my throne to preserve what I learned from witnessing such genuine goodness, then perhaps that loss carries its own kind of value. Alara felt her chest tighten at his words, a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the physical comfort of the cave, and everything to do with the sincerity evident in his voice. "You will not lose," she said firmly, surprising herself with her own certainty. "I refuse to accept that as an outcome, not after everything you have already overcome." "Your confidence is appreciated," he said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time since she had found him wounded in the forest. "Though confidence alone will not heal these wounds quickly enough to matter." "Then let me help however I can," Alara said. "Tell me what you need, and I will find a way to provide it." He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression that seemed to weigh a decision far more significant than simple gratitude for her assistance. "There is a particular herb," he said slowly, "one that grows only in a hidden grove deeper in the forest, known for accelerating healing beyond what nature alone typically allows. If you could gather it, it might make the difference between facing Colwyn in a week or facing him in half that time." "Tell me where to find it," Alara said without hesitation, "and I will bring it to you before the sun sets." The location he described lay deeper into the forest than Alara had ever ventured, through terrain that would require careful navigation and no small amount of courage, given everything she now understood about the dangers that might lurk among the trees. Yet as she prepared to leave the cave, gathering her basket and steadying her resolve, she felt something settle within her, a certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had already chosen her path the moment she offered that first loaf of bread 5 years earlier, long before she understood the true weight of what her simple kindness might eventually demand of her. Thorns tore at Alara's sleeves as she pushed through the dense undergrowth, deeper into the forest than she had ever ventured, the king's directions guiding her past landmarks that grew increasingly unfamiliar with each passing hour. The sun had climbed high overhead by the time she finally spotted the hidden grove he had described, a small clearing bathed in unusual light, where pale purple flowers grew in clusters around the base of ancient moss-covered stones. She knelt to gather the herbs carefully, following his instructions to take only the roots rather than damaging the entire plant, when a low growl behind her froze every muscle in her body. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, to find a large gray wolf watching her from the edge of the clearing, its posture tense but not immediately aggressive, its eyes holding the same unsettling intelligence she had witnessed in the dark wolf that had intervened during the bandit attack. "I am not here to cause harm," she said carefully, unsure whether the creature could understand her words, but unwilling to remain silent in the face of such uncertainty. "I am gathering herbs for someone who needs healing." The wolf's ears flattened slightly, and it took a cautious step closer, sniffing the air, as though trying to determine the truth of her claim. Alara remained perfectly still, remembering her earlier encounter near the mill pond, trusting that stillness rather than fear would serve her better than any attempt to flee through unfamiliar terrain. "For Corwin," she added, using the name Fenwick had spoken during his visit to the cave, the name she now understood belonged to the wounded king she had tended through the night. "He is injured, and these herbs will help him heal." At the mention of the name, something shifted in the wolf's posture, its tension easing slightly, though it continued to watch her with careful attention. After several long moments, it turned and disappeared back into the trees, leaving Alara alone in the clearing, with her heart still racing from the encounter. She finished gathering the herbs quickly after that, unwilling to test her luck further, and made her way back toward the cave with considerably more urgency than her outward journey had required. The path seemed longer on the return trip, every shadow suddenly holding the potential for danger she had not fully appreciated during her initial journey, driven as she had been by determination rather than caution. When she finally reached the cave, breathless and scratched from her hurried passage through the underbrush, she found Corwin sitting up against the cave wall, looking marginally stronger than he had that morning, though the wounds across his shoulder and side remained clearly visible beneath the bandages she had fashioned. "You found it," he said, relief evident in his voice, as she presented the gathered roots. "I worried I had sent you into greater danger than I anticipated." "I encountered a wolf," Alara admitted, settling beside him to help prepare the herbs as he instructed. "Gray, watchful. It seemed to recognize your name when I spoke it." "Fenwick's mate, likely," Corwin said, a faint smile touching his lips, despite his exhaustion. "She would have been watching for any sign of trouble, given how uncertain our current situation remains." They worked together preparing the herbs, Corwin guiding her through the process despite his weakened condition, and Alara found herself settling into the strange rhythm of their collaboration, with an ease that surprised her, given how dramatically her understanding of him had shifted over the past days. The mysterious beggar she had fed out of simple compassion had become something far more complex. A king, facing genuine danger, a man whose vulnerability now felt entirely different from the quiet suffering she had witnessed at the crossroads for so many years. "Tell me about Colwyn," she said as they worked, curious about the rival who threatened everything Corwin had built. "What kind of leader would he be, if he succeeds in claiming your position?" Corwin's expression darkened slightly at the question. Colwyn believes strength alone determines worth, that compassion and patience are weaknesses to be exploited rather than virtues to be cultivated. Under his leadership, I fear our kind would grow increasingly isolated from humanity, viewing every interaction as opportunity for conquest rather than coexistence. "And you believe differently," Alara said, though it was not truly a question. "I have spent 5 years living among humans, Alara, watching how your kind struggles and suffers, and still manages to find moments of genuine kindness, despite every hardship life presents," he said. "I have seen cruelty, certainly, the mockery and disdain that greeted me at that crossroads for so long, but I have also seen you, offering bread without expectation, tending my wounds without fear, risking your own safety to gather herbs in a forest that could easily have harmed you. That balance between cruelty and kindness exists among humans just as surely as it exists among my own kind. Colwyn would see only the cruelty, would use it to justify treating all humans as enemies rather than potential allies." Alara considered his words carefully, understanding for the first time the true weight of what his years at the crossroads had represented. Not simply a personal test of character, but an attempt to bridge understanding between two worlds that rarely intersected with anything approaching mutual respect. "How long before you must face him?" she asked. "Fenwick suggested days, though I suspect that estimate was generous," Corwin said. "Colwyn will not wait indefinitely, particularly once word spreads that I have been sighted, wounded and vulnerable, hidden away from the pack's usual gathering places." "Then we should not waste the time we have," Alara said firmly, applying the prepared herbs to his wounds with careful attention. "These will help you heal faster, but you will also need rest, proper nourishment, whatever strength I can help provide, before you must face this challenge." Over the following days, Alara divided her time between her family's bakery and the hidden cave, offering whatever excuse she could manage to explain her frequent absences, though she suspected Mara at least had begun to suspect something significant was occurring, beyond the simple explanations she offered. She brought food, fresh water, whatever supplies might aid Corwin's recovery, and slowly, gradually, she watched him transform from the wounded, vulnerable figure she had discovered behind the fallen log into something closer to the commanding presence she had witnessed during the bandit attack. Their conversations during this period grew increasingly personal, moving beyond the careful, guarded exchanges that had characterized their relationship for years into something deeper, more honest. Corwin spoke of his early years as a young wolf, learning the responsibilities of leadership, of the isolation that came with authority, of his growing conviction that true strength required understanding, rather than mere dominance. Alara, in turn, found herself sharing details of her own life she had rarely voiced aloud. Her mother's death when she was young, the weight of responsibility that had settled on her shoulders, helping raise Mara and Peter, the quiet loneliness that had shaped her own understanding of compassion and connection. "You never sought anything for yourself," Corwin observed one evening, watching her prepare a simple meal over a small fire she had carefully built near the cave entrance. 5 years of kindness toward a stranger, and you never once asked what you might gain from such devotion." "I did not think of it as devotion at the time," Alara said honestly. "It felt simply like the right thing to do, offering kindness to someone the world had chosen to ignore." "And now?" he asked, his silver eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite herself. "Now that you understand what that kindness truly meant, both to me and to the larger balance between our two worlds, how do you feel about the choice you made all those years ago?" Alara considered the question carefully, aware that her answer carried weight beyond simple politeness, aware too of the growing warmth she felt whenever his eyes met hers, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling between them, and everything to do with the man, or perhaps the king, sitting across from her. "I feel," she said slowly, "that I would make the same choice again, without hesitation, regardless of what I now understand about who you truly are. Perhaps that understanding only makes me more certain that kindness, freely given, matters more than we often realize." Corwin's expression softened at her words, something vulnerable and genuine passing across his features that reminded her of the moment their eyes had first met at the crossroads 5 years earlier, before either of them understood the significance of what that first exchange of bread would eventually mean for both their lives. "Whatever happens with Colwyn," he said quietly, "I want you to know that these years spent knowing you have changed me more profoundly than any lesson I might have learned, remaining safely among my own kind. You have shown me, Alara, that true nobility exists in the smallest acts of compassion, offered without expectation, sustained without recognition. That is a lesson I intend to carry forward, regardless of what challenges still await us both." The fire crackled softly between them, and Alara felt the weight of his words settle into her heart, alongside a growing certainty that whatever came next, whatever battle awaited him against Colwyn's challenge, she would face it alongside him, not as a simple baker's daughter offering charitable bread, but as someone who had come to understand and care for the man beneath the crown, in ways that ran far deeper than she had ever anticipated when she first knelt beside a ragged stranger at the village crossroads. A horn sounded through the forest at dawn, deep and resonant, unlike anything Alara had heard before, and Corwin rose immediately from where he had been resting, his expression tightening with grim recognition. "Colwyn has grown impatient," he said, moving toward the cave entrance with a strength that had returned faster than Alara dared hope, thanks to days of careful healing and the herbs she had gathered from the hidden grove. "That is the challenge, Horn. He demands the confrontation happen today, whether I am ready or not." "You cannot face him yet," Alara protested, panic rising in her chest as she followed him toward the entrance. "Your wounds have barely closed. You need more time." "Time is a luxury Colwyn has decided I no longer deserve," Corwin said, though his voice carried a steadiness that suggested he had already accepted the reality of the situation. "Tradition demands that once the challenge horn sounds, the confrontation must occur before the sun sets, or the challenged party forfeits their position entirely." Alara felt a cold weight settle in her stomach at his words, understanding now the true urgency of their circumstances. "Then let me come with you," she said. "Whatever happens, I refuse to wait here in ignorance while your fate is decided." "It is dangerous, Alara. The gathering will include the entire pack, creatures who have never encountered a human closely, and who may not react well to your presence. I have already faced bandits, wolves, and the uncertainty of everything I have learned about you these past days," she said firmly. "I am not prepared to abandon you now, not when you need support more than ever." Corwin studied her for a long moment, something like gratitude and concern mixing across his features, before finally nodding. "Stay close to me," he said, "and do not intervene, regardless of what you witness. The pack has its own rules regarding such challenges, and any interference, however well-intentioned, could have consequences neither of us wants to face." They made their way through the forest together, Corwin moving with steadily increasing confidence despite the lingering stiffness in his injured shoulder, until they reached a wide clearing, deeper in the woods than Alara had ever ventured, where dozens of wolves had already gathered, their forms shifting occasionally between animal and something closer to human as they awaited the confrontation. Colwyn stood at the center of the gathering, a massive wolf with dark, scarred fur that spoke of countless previous battles, his posture radiating confidence and barely restrained aggression. As Corwin entered the clearing, Colwyn's form shifted, becoming a tall, broad man with cold eyes and an expression of contemptuous satisfaction. "You return at last," Colwyn said, his voice carrying easily across the silent clearing. "Weakened, I see, from whatever foolish injuries you sustained hiding among the humans, and you bring one of them here, to witness your final humiliation?" Murmurs rippled through the gathered pack at the sight of Alara, though Corwin stepped protectively closer to her, his expression hardening into the commanding presence she had witnessed during the bandit attack weeks earlier. "She has done nothing to warrant your scorn, Colwyn. This challenge concerns leadership of our pack, nothing more." "Everything about your time among humans concerns this pack," Colwyn countered, his gaze sweeping dismissively over the gathered wolves, as though seeking their agreement. "You abandoned your responsibilities, weakened yourself with human sentiment, And now, you expect us to accept your continued leadership without question? I offer strength, certainty, a return to the traditions that made our kind powerful, before you decided compassion mattered more than dominance. Compassion and strength are not opposites, Corwin said, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. True strength includes the wisdom to understand when patience serves better than aggression, when building alliances serves better than conquest. You would lead our kind toward isolation and conflict with the very humans whose lands border our own. Enough talk, Colwyn snarled, his form already beginning to shift back toward his wolf shape. Let strength decide this matter, as our traditions demand. The pack elders, a group of older wolves who had remained silent throughout the exchange, stepped forward to formally announce the beginning of the challenge, their voices carrying ancient words that Alara did not fully understand, but recognized as ceremonial in nature. Corwin moved to the center of the clearing, his own form beginning to shift, and Alara watched with a mixture of fear and fascination as the man she had known for 5 years transformed into something else entirely. A massive wolf, with fur so dark it seemed to absorb the surrounding light, unmistakably the same creature that had intervened during the bandit attack. The two wolves circled each other for a long moment, testing, assessing, before Colwyn lunged forward with sudden ferocity. And the clearing erupted into chaos as the two massive creatures clashed with a violence that made Alara's heart clench with fear for the man she had come to care for so deeply. She wanted to look away, unable to bear witnessing potential harm coming to Corwin, but found herself unable to tear her eyes from the confrontation, her hands clenched tightly at her sides as she watched claws and teeth flash in the dappled forest light. The battle stretched on longer than Alara had anticipated, both combatants clearly evenly matched despite Corwin's recent injuries, neither willing to yield ground despite the exhaustion visible in their movements. Colwyn's earlier confidence began to fracture as the confrontation continued, his attacks growing more desperate, more reckless, while Corwin, despite his weakened condition, seemed to draw on some deeper reserve of strength and determination that kept him steady against his opponent's increasingly frantic assault. Alara found herself thinking of everything Corwin had shared during their days together in the cave, his conviction that true strength required patience and understanding rather than mere dominance, and she watched that philosophy play out in the confrontation itself, Corwin's aggressive recklessness gradually undermining his own advantage, as Corwin's more measured, patient approach allowed him to conserve strength while waiting for the opening he needed. That opening came as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Colwyn overextending in a desperate lunge that Corwin sidestepped with precise timing, using his opponent's own momentum against him to pin the larger wolf against the forest floor. The clearing fell silent as Corwin held his position, his teeth bared but not descending for a killing blow, his eyes fixed on his defeated opponent with an expression that held no trace of the vengeful satisfaction Alara might have expected. The pack elders stepped forward, declaring the challenge concluded, Corwin's victory recognized, according to whatever ancient traditions governed such confrontations. Corwin, defeated and humiliated, rose slowly once released, his form shifting back to human as he retreated from the clearing without another word, his supporters among the gathered pack following in uncomfortable silence. Corwin shifted back to his human form as well, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, and Alara rushed forward without hesitation, uncaring of the watching pack as she helped support his weight, relief flooding through her at his survival, despite the visible cost the confrontation had extracted. "You did it," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion she had not fully anticipated feeling. "You defeated him." "We did it," Corwin corrected gently, his silver eyes meeting hers with a warmth that made her chest tighten. "Without your care these past days, Alara, I would never have possessed the strength necessary to face this challenge. Your kindness saved far more than my life. It saved everything I have worked to build these past years." The gathered pack watched this exchange with expressions ranging from curiosity to grudging respect, and Alara understood, even without fully articulating the thought, that something significant had shifted, not only in Corwin's position among his own kind, but in the fragile understanding beginning to form between two worlds that had rarely intersected with anything approaching genuine respect and cooperation. Bells rang across the village square just after sunrise, though this time the sound carried none of the frantic alarm that had accompanied the bandit attack weeks earlier. instead ringing out in a steady, celebratory rhythm that drew curious villagers from their homes despite the early hour. Alara stood near the bakery, watching as Corwin walked into the village square for the first time, without the tattered rags that had defined his appearance for 5 long years, dressed instead in simple, but well-made clothing that Fenwick had provided, his bearing radiating a quiet authority that immediately captured the attention of every gathered villager. Osric approached cautiously, recognizing the transformation, but clearly uncertain how to address someone he had known only as a beggar for so many years. "You are the one who saved us from the bandits," he said slowly. "But you are also something more, are you not?" "I am Corwin," he said, his voice carrying easily across the hushed square. "Leader of the wolf pack that shares this forest with your village. Though for 5 years, I chose to live among you as one of your own, stripped of any privilege my position might otherwise have granted me." Murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the gathered crowd, villagers exchanging glances as they processed this revelation, memories surfacing of every cruel word spoken, every stone thrown, every moment of casual disdain shown toward the man they now understood to be far more significant than they had ever imagined. Delia, standing near the edge of the crowd, looked particularly pale as she recalled her own gossip about the wolves and their mysterious king, never once suspecting the subject of her stories stood among them all along. "Why?" Osric asked carefully. "Would someone with your position choose such a humble existence among us?" "To understand whether kindness could exist independent of expectation or reward," Corwin said, his eyes finding Alara across the square. "To learn whether true compassion could be found among those who believed they gained nothing from offering it. I found my answer, though perhaps not in the way I originally anticipated." The crowd's attention shifted toward Alara, understanding beginning to dawn as villagers connected years of her quiet visits to the crossroads, memories of teasing remarks about wasted bread and foolish charity, taking on new significance in light of this revelation. Mara, standing beside her sister, squeezed her hand gently, her expression a mixture of astonishment and quiet pride. "For 5 years," Corwin continued, addressing the gathered crowd directly, "this village mocked and dismissed a man they believed deserved nothing but scorn. Yet one person among you continued offering kindness, regardless of what the rest of you believed about my worth. That kindness, freely given without any knowledge of who I truly was, revealed a character I have rarely encountered, even among my own kind." The following days brought significant changes to the village, as word of Corwin's true identity spread through the surrounding countryside, drawing curious visitors and cautious diplomatic overtures from neighboring settlements eager to understand what this revelation might mean for their own relationships with the forest and its inhabitants. Alara found herself navigating an entirely new reality, villagers who had once ignored her now seeking her attention and approval, assuming some manner of influence she had never sought nor entirely welcomed. "It feels strange," she confided to Corwin one evening, as they walked together along the edge of the forest, no longer needing to hide their growing friendship from curious eyes. "People who once mocked my charity now treat me as though I possess some special wisdom, simply because of who you turned out to be." "Does their sudden respect trouble you?" Corwin asked, watching her carefully. "It troubles me that their opinion changed based on your position, rather than the actual kindness itself," Alara admitted. "I offered bread to a beggar because it was right, not because I anticipated any reward. Now that same act is celebrated only because the beggar happened to be a king. That seems to miss the point entirely." Corwin nodded, understanding evident in his expression. "You have identified precisely the flaw I hope to address through my years at that crossroads," he said. "True character should be judged by the quality of one's actions, not by the eventual status of those who receive them. Yet I fear such wisdom rarely survives contact with human nature, or wolf nature for that matter. We are drawn toward power and status almost instinctively, regardless of the lessons we claim to value." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the evening air cool and pleasant, before Corwin spoke again, his tone shifting into something more serious. "I must return to my responsibilities among the pack soon, Alara. The challenge with Colwyn resolved the immediate threat to my position, but rebuilding trust and unity, after such division, will require considerable attention and effort." Alara felt an unexpected pang of loss at his words, though she had known, on some level, that this transition had always been inevitable once his secret was revealed. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her chest. Your people need you." "They do," he agreed, "but I find myself reluctant to return to that world entirely, Ilara, not without addressing something that has grown between us these past weeks, something I believe existed in quieter form, for far longer than either of us has been willing to fully acknowledge." She turned to look at him fully then, her heart beginning to race, as she recognized the vulnerability evident in his expression, so different from the guarded neutrality he had maintained during their years of quiet exchanges at the crossroads. "What are you trying to say?" she asked softly. "I am trying to say," Corwin replied, taking a step closer, "that 5 years of watching you offer kindness without expectation taught me more about genuine character than any lesson from my own kind ever could. But these past weeks, working alongside you, sharing my truth with you, facing danger together, have taught me something else entirely. I have come to care for you, Ilara, not simply as someone who showed me kindness, but as a person whose company I treasure, whose wisdom I respect, whose presence has become essential to whatever future I might hope to build." Ilara felt her breath catch at his words, emotions she had been carefully suppressing during the chaos of recent weeks, suddenly rising to the surface with undeniable clarity. "I have felt something similar," she admitted quietly, "though I was uncertain how to name it, given everything that has changed between us so quickly." "Then let us discover together what that feeling might mean," Corwin said, "though I understand fully that whatever future we might build together carries complications neither of us can fully anticipate. My responsibilities to my pack, your responsibilities to your family, the challenge of bridging two worlds that have rarely trusted one another. These are not small obstacles." "No," Ilara agreed, "but neither was the challenge of tending a wounded stranger without understanding his true nature, or standing beside him during a confrontation that could have ended in tragedy. I have never shied away from difficult choices when I believed the outcome mattered, Corwin, and I do not intend to start now." The forest around them seemed to hold its breath as they stood facing each other in the fading evening light. 5 years of quiet devotion and unspoken connection, finally finding voice in words neither had dared speak aloud until this moment. Whatever challenges awaited them, in bridging their separate worlds, in navigating the expectations of both pack and village, Ilara felt a steady certainty settling over her heart, the same certainty that had guided her to offer that first loaf of bread so many years ago, trusting that kindness and genuine connection would ultimately prove more powerful than any obstacle standing in their path. Snow had begun to fall by the time the pack elders gathered at the forest's edge to witness a ceremony unlike any their traditions had recorded in generations, and Ilara stood nervously at the entrance to the clearing, Mara and Peter beside her. Her father recovered fully from his illness, and beaming with a pride he had not fully articulated, but that shone clearly in his expression nonetheless. Villagers had gathered too, an unprecedented mingling of human and wolf that would have seemed impossible only months earlier, before Corwin's true identity had reshaped everything the village believed about the forest and its inhabitants. The months following Corwin's declaration of feeling had brought their own challenges, exactly as he had predicted that evening along the forest edge. Some among the pack remained skeptical of a leader who had chosen to care for a human woman, echoing Colwyn's earlier accusations about weakness and misplaced priorities, though Fenwick and several other loyal wolves had worked steadily to build acceptance among the more hesitant members. Similarly, some villagers struggled to fully embrace the strange new reality of living alongside creatures they had feared and misunderstood for generations, old superstitions proving difficult to fully abandon, despite mounting evidence of the pack's genuine desire for peaceful coexistence. Yet through it all, Ilara and Corwin had continued building their relationship with the same patient determination that had characterized every previous challenge they had faced together. Whether tending wounds in a hidden cave or standing united against Colwyn's aggressive challenge, their bond had only strengthened through each obstacle, and now, as winter's first snow dusted the clearing where pack and village had gathered together, Ilara felt a calm certainty, replacing whatever nervousness lingered from the significance of the moment awaiting her. Corwin stood at the center of the gathering, dressed in ceremonial clothing that marked his position as Alpha King, though the warmth in his silver eyes as they found Ilara across the clearing carried none of the formal distance such ceremonies might typically demand. Fenwick stood beside him, serving as witness to proceedings that blended ancient pack tradition with elements borrowed thoughtfully from human custom, a symbolic gesture toward the union of worlds this moment represented. 5 years ago, Corwin began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent gathering. I sat at a crossroads, stripped of my position and privilege, testing whether kindness could exist without expectation of reward. One person among an entire village chose compassion when cruelty would have been easier, chose generosity when indifference would have cost nothing. That choice, sustained faithfully across 5 years without any hope of recognition or gratitude, revealed a character worthy of far more than simple admiration. He extended his hand toward Alara, and she stepped forward to join him at the center of the clearing, aware of every eye watching this unprecedented moment, though her attention remained fixed entirely on the man before her, whose journey from ragged beggar to alpha king had become inseparable from her own journey of understanding what true partnership and devotion truly required. I do not ask you to join me as reward for years of kindness, Corwin said, taking her hands in his voice softening as he spoke words meant only for her, despite the gathered audience. I ask you to stand beside me, because these months of shared challenge and growing understanding have shown me a partnership built on genuine respect, mutual support, and love that neither status nor species could ever fully explain or contain. I did not offer kindness, those 5 years hoping for a crown, Alara replied, her own voice steady, despite the emotion evident beneath her words. I offered it because you deserved compassion, regardless of who you were. And I do not accept your proposal now, because you are a king, Corwin. I accept it because you are the man, wolf, whatever form you take, that I have come to love through every challenge we have faced together. The gathered crowd, both human and wolf, erupted into celebration as the ceremony concluded, ancient traditions and modern hopes intertwining in a moment that would be remembered for generations as the beginning of genuine peace between two worlds that had rarely trusted each other before this unlikely union. Osric offered formal blessings on behalf of the village, while Fenwick spoke ancient words of unity on behalf of the pack, and Alara found herself laughing with genuine joy as Mara and Peter rushed forward to embrace her, her father's proud tears mixing with the gently falling snow. In the months and years that followed, the peace forged between village and pack proved far more resilient than anyone had initially anticipated. Built as it was on the same foundation of genuine kindness and mutual respect that had first drawn Alara to offer bread to a stranger she believed deserved compassion despite his apparent poverty. Trade flourished between the two communities, humans learning valuable skills from the forest's ancient inhabitants, while wolves gained access to resources and knowledge that enriched their own traditions. Children from both worlds grew up understanding each other, not as strange or frightening, but simply as neighbors sharing the same forest and fields. Alara herself found her role evolving naturally, alongside these broader changes, serving as a bridge between two worlds whose leaders trusted her judgment precisely because she had never sought power or recognition for herself, only ever offering kindness because it felt like the right thing to do. Villagers who had once mocked her charity now sought her guidance on matters both mundane and significant, though she never allowed such respect to change the fundamental generosity that had defined her character long before anyone understood the true significance of the man she fed at that lonely crossroads. Corwin, for his part, continued balancing his responsibilities as Alpha King with the deep partnership he had built with Alara, their combined leadership demonstrating daily that strength and compassion were never truly opposites, but rather complementary qualities that, together, created something far more powerful and lasting than either alone could achieve. Colwyn, humbled by his earlier defeat, eventually found his own place within the pack's new structure, his aggressive tendencies gradually tempered by years of watching genuine cooperation between human and wolf prove more effective than the isolation and conquest he had once championed. As seasons passed and years accumulated into a legacy neither Alara nor Corwin had fully anticipated when they first exchanged bread and silence at a forgotten crossroads, the story of their unlikely bond became something villages and packs alike told to their children, not as mere legend or superstition, but as living proof that true nobility required nothing more than the courage to offer kindness freely, and the wisdom to recognize its worth regardless of the form it eventually took. The crossroads itself, once a place of quiet charity offered without expectation, became a symbol of the peace that patient compassion could ultimately build, standing as testament to the truth that had guided Alara's heart from that very first loaf of bread onward, that genuine goodness sustained faithfully regardless of recognition or reward, possessed the power to reshape entire worlds.